What's up, everyone? Welcome to the 9th episode of Super Brain Radio, the final content episode in Chapter 2, Adapt. And it's funny because I've purposely tried to wait as long as possible to give sleep its own episode. I think I may have alluded to it or something related to it once or twice, but there was a reason that I felt like we had to cover a good amount of stuff before we get to sleep. More importantly, I've kind of studied sleep extensively to the point where I feel like I have some really novel ideas about it, and you can't understand where those ideas came from and were formed until we've talked about other stuff like the immune system and everything related to it up until this point. Enzymes, the strategy, behavior, enzymatic axis, these are all things that are really important, as well as that like philosophical notion that I've proposed to you all, that the brain is always listening. All of that is kind of going to be melded together in a novel way for this episode. But before we even get into talking about and defining sleep, we need to understand what is sleep related to. And it sounds weird, but, because of the categorical confines of information that have been presented to most of us throughout our lives, sleep seems to be like its own entity, whereas we also think of exercise with nutrition and health. And things tend to be coupled more so, where sleep is its own thing. And what's also interesting is that kind of no matter who you are, where you are in life, or what age you are, everyone tends to value sleep. So we need to at least identify who its cousins are with the biological system and remind ourselves that everything is everything and there is no isolated system that just does its own thing and it is what it is. It's certainly not true. So the cousins here are the immune system, which you guys have gotten to know a little bit already. So we're going to cover its other cousin, or brother, sister, whatever you want to go with, the circadian rhythm. Now, right off the bat, when people talk about your sleep-wake cycle, what I want you to think of is what time you go to bed and wake up. That's certainly different than light and dark cycles. And although arbitrary terms, this is the beginning of the delineation I would like to introduce you to in. So we kind of can look at it as your sleep-wake cycle is the habitual human portion of it, and light-dark cycles, or more likely sun and moon cycles, are the biological analog, the information, and all that stuff. So to go even further and reference an analogy we've had in the past of electricity carrying information, the sleep-wake cycle is the electricity, and your light, dark, sun, moon cycles are the information. So, in reality, the beauty of this is it doesn't matter if you wake up before the sun or if you wake up at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. You have an opportunity to live however you want because of this dichotomy, but it means that they both matter. So if you choose to wake up at 4 in the afternoon, that means that the information from your sun and moon cycles are going to be altered. So there's some responsibility on your shoulders to go along with that. The same way as if you're a busybody who drinks caffeine, you're probably going to need some extra help and support when it comes to relaxing at night. And maybe you don't, and that's awesome if you're one of those people. But I'm just exposing you all to the fact that there may be a difference between these two, but at the same time they have this inherent linkage, which is why I kind of use the concept of cousins. Cousins are only roughly 12.5% our genetic similarity to you. So I was like, yeah, that makes some sense, brothers and sisters a little bit too close, because in a way, like I said, these really aren't married at all. You can actually so much as wake up and go to bed at different times irregularly throughout the week for weeks on end and maintain biological integrity in your circadian rhythm. And I'm telling you that firsthand because I've been flying every weekend since the second week in April or so, with like 1 or 2 gaps here and there. But for the most part, I've been training 4 days a week, sometimes 5, decent amount of 5, and I'm in 2 time zones a week for a lot of it right now, which is funny because I actually found solace in the very stuff I'm talking to you guys about now. Obviously, the first few weeks were especially rough because most of it was actually self-inflicted. I was trying to do too much in the period where I was flying and not flying, and just didn't see it as a continuous rhythm of time. And I hope you guys can take that and extrapolate it into your own lives. So maybe you're really busy right now. Maybe there's an uptick at work that's taking up extra energy, or maybe it's the opposite. Maybe your energy levels are just down and you're in a rut. Remember that things are linear and forward moving, and it's never, ever, ever going to be the case where you're reliving the same day every day. And I didn't actually plan that to be such a powerful segue, but it's that there's no start and stop to our days biologically. The circadian rhythm, and like I've mentioned kind of in a nihilistic joke in the past, were chemical reactions going unidirectionally towards death. The circadian rhythm kind of mirrors that, not in the fact that we're going towards death, but in the fact that it's a continuum. It's more like a video buffering from 0% to 100% than it is playing a game of cards where you get dealt a new hand all the time. So now that we have this little philosophical concept going on, there are certain aspects of the circadian rhythm I need to expose you guys to. And I'm going to categorically put it into 4 chunks. We have the sun rising, which is going to contain each section is actually going to contain its own photons that matter, light-based particles, and all the stuff that make them novel. So the sun rising is going to be what sparks our immune system's ability to move fatty acids, and yes, that does come from immune system aid for all my biological nerds out there. But the immune system's ability to transfer carnitine proteins through the mitochondria starts with morning sunlight. Now, again, you don't necessarily have to be awake for this to happen, but you guys should be aware of that, and it's very, very important. Next, during the peak levels of sunlight, you should be able to have the best ability to digest food and go through things like that because we have an activated nervous system which has already gone through hormonal cascades making you feel good, and now we're on the second half of them, which should allow for a little more blood to be in your stomach, and you've actually expended a good amount of energy by this part of the day if you wake up in that typical 7 to 8 a.m. range. But these sections of the day, even if they don't match up with your sleep-wake cycle, still apply in their chronological order and respective rights. Next, we have the sun starting to go down and this transition with colors in the sky and usually temperatures depending on where you live and all this stuff. This is going to be important timing, especially because this is where things start to change and prediction patterns start to change. It's very important for the body to be able to have nourishment continually through these 2 middle sections of the day, because if not, we're going to have stress hormone responses and neurochemical responses that tend to feel like anxiety to fuel the glucose and energetic demands of actually going to sleep. And we're going to talk about that, funny enough, in a minute. But this third portion of the day is incredibly important for the liver and transitioning like a baton in a relay race. Lastly and logically, we have the moon. The moon's photons emissions are going to be responsible for melatonin cascades. Serotonin secreted during that first portion of the day is actually the bigger molecular version of melatonin. So by the time we get to this portion, it's actually photon emissions from the moon that help the enzymatic cleaving of serotonin into melatonin for it to be used. It's an incredibly specific process. This also goes along with GABA, the neurotransmitter and time clock proteins, these little employees in all of our organs that help identify what time of day it is based on the brain and light. Everyone goes to work during this 4th phase, and you can actually start to view it as something where each phase is actually preparing the next one to go in a cyclic manner. It's truly, truly amazing. Now, we can actually start talking about sleep a little more. It's funny because once you set it up and think about it this way, the next rules and ideas I'm going to give you are going to be actually a lot simpler and easier. First, remember that It ain't free, people. Nothing is free biologically. So the learning and changing that you make during sleep, when we rewire neurons and all these things happen, are certainly not free. And more importantly, that excitatory process of learning needs to be over. So for example, both scenarios are good, as a preface. If you have an incredible workout or work day and you go back and sleep amazing, it means that the learning excitatory portion of the learning process, most specifically, has been ended, and you can now start restoring those neurons. It's called long-term potentiation, and if you've heard me make the sword analogy when it gets red hot and cools and slowly changes in shape, this is where that's happening specifically. These waking hours allow the neurons associated with whatever learning you may be involved in to get red hot, and at some point in the next 24 to 72 hours, they're going to slow down. Now, when they're their reddest and hottest, if you will, there's a very good chance you don't sleep well that night. And that's certainly okay and not something to stress about, because it's simply an order of magnitude. The hotter it gets, the longer it takes to cool down. The hotter it gets, the more important the brain saw it as. The hotter it gets, the more nutritional demands, so on and so forth. Make a ton of change in your life and have a ton of red hot neurons, and your sleep may seem wonky, but you probably still feel good. An importantly cool thing to note, and an importantly efficient a thing to note, because it means that you're going to be running out of gas soon. Now, what's cool is I did make this a little bit of a hyperbole and personified thing in the sense of using the terms you and relating it directly to someone, but the beauty of it is our pawns auto-regulates most of this for us. And all of my points here are to summate, actually, you don't have to worry about much now. Because our pawns can auto-regulate things, our immune system gets active in the brain at night. Free radicals and antioxidants are totally different in the brain than inflammation in your skin suit. So what it all summates to is your sleep is already essentially set up before you get in bed. What you have to do as a person is ensure you don't mess that up too much. You can mess it up with your thoughts, with improper habits, obviously with improper supplement timing, many, many things. But all we need to start focusing on are the following. 1, ensuring that you get to sleep when your head hits the pillow in a mode that is synergistic with sleep. So you can't just shut off the TV and waltz on over the bed and then lie down, close your eyes, and expect to fall asleep. The same way if it's, maybe it's not the TV, maybe it's your phone, your laptop, anything stimulatory is going to need a transition period before you get in bed. It's just that simple, whether you feel it or not. Secondly, and potentially more importantly, you need to recognize that sleep is not a static continuum. The concept of needing 8 hours of sleep all the time, needing to worry about if you're in REM sleep or not, or deep, or stage 1 or stage 2, none of that actually is going to matter because it's not under your direct control, because our brain has a more important job of listening all day long and doing something properly. Now, that doesn't mean you can't shoot yourself in the foot, but what it means is if you don't shoot yourself in the foot, that you can have a lot of faith in your sleep systems. Every single day is different, therefore every single night of sleep is going to be different. We cannot categorize accurately the amount of sleep you need in a single night because everyone's life demands, immune systems, and everything are different. Some of you will see dose dependent, meaning it just gets better as you get more, or some of you, it may be very stage oriented, threshold oriented. Every single person is different in their needs, and furthermore, every single person is very, very different in their brain setup, which means that it's going to have different deficiencies, weaknesses, and strengths when it comes to the pawn's auto-regulated decision making. So, in that case, what we need to be aware of, right? That makes the conversation start to sound differently altogether. And that was my real point for you all here, because if you're intuitive and mindful and you've been listening along not just this episode, the previous ones, you can almost answer the rest of the questions you may have on your own. But I'm going to give you guys some key tips, and we're going to end with something a bit more succinct to bring it back to reality, because we were definitely out there in Andyland at a couple of points, and it's just inevitable. So I hope you guys enjoy that stuff. By the way, we need to start viewing bedtime as this baton passing phenomenon. We need to eliminate the concept that you're going to sleep and hitting the reset button. What it really is that fourth stage light transition into first stage light. And if you kind of rewind and listen, those do kind of sound like the coolest ones. And it's not that they're the coolest, it just happens to be when the most biology changes, but that means that the middle 2 days then become where all the listening happens. So if you want to optimize the bookends of the day, you start by getting better information during the day. You can't get better information during the day if you have inefficient bookends of the day. So just by proxy of simple philosophical math, if you will, and kind of figuring out the difference, it means bedtime is that important. Not whether you sleep well or not, but actually going to bed. Because there's this psychosocial need to sleep I mentioned very early, but everything beyond that gets handled for you. So find bedtime routines that allow you to be friction free, if you will, mentally. When you go to bed, there's nothing stopping you. You're at peace and you're ready and not rushed to fall asleep. Then just trust and let it happen. When you wake up in the morning, take those couple minutes of precious neurochemical secretion times to yourself. That's arguably some of the coolest parts of the day biologically. So invest in personal development, in mindfulness, mental health, whatever it is to you, do that upon waking. And lastly, have a relationship with light outside. It's funny, the photons emitted from the light or the moon and whatever are not UV. It's totally different. Photons are not rays. So they can traverse skin, bone, clothes, and some really cool stuff like that. And as little as 90 seconds makes a difference. So try to get exposure to the AM sunlight before, say, 10 a.m. your time. And try to get at least 90 seconds of moonlight exposure before passing out. Do that enough days in a row, and you're going to honestly notice a difference in your biology just because you're providing more accurate and consistent and important information to that circadian rhythm that we talked about. If you worry a little bit more about the circadian rhythm and a little bit less about what's happening while you sleep, I promise the end outcome will end up being a lot better.